How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Mike here. Welcome to my oasis where I get in front of a camera and talk to you about whatever I want. Today I'm going to tell you about a personal story. Really, I'm going to talk to you about something that's been bothering me and something that I'm really passionate about when it comes to the gap between the rich and the poor. It's a conversation and it's probably a debate that's gonna last a lifetime. So last Thursday, exactly a week ago, because I'm making this video on a Thursday, I was having dinner with some buddies of mine. We always have this get together, and generally speaking, we would have new people come in, you meet each other for the first time. It's kind of cool because you get to find out and meet new people, learn about their stories. So it was a normal Thursday evening. One of the people that I met for the second time, I believe, I told him my story. I got to learn about him, and he goes, "Man, you must have grown up in a wealthy family." I get this often, which now it offends me in a way because I know that this could not be far from the truth about how I grew up, my childhood, my teenage years. He was adamant on it, and I had to defend myself and said, "Dude, you need to understand the dire situations that I grew up in." Then another buddy jumps in and supports the theory of the first and is like, "Yeah, Mike, you grew up rich." Again, it offends me because oftentimes when people see my life now, they just assume oh, this kid who comes from an immigrant family, his parents must have been really wealthy for him to have this life. Again, it couldn't be further from the truth, at least partially, because I learned something about myself that I never even took a look at before. When the second person comes in and started throwing the theory out hey, you must have grown up rich, and I'm like, no. And then I started telling them my story of growing up in the ghetto in America when I moved to New York at the age of 12, and also some of the dire situations that I grew up in or with when I lived in Lagos. My other buddy started asking me these questions, and he said, "Well, how did you grow up? Where did you live? Blah, blah, blah." These are stuff that he knew already, but he wanted to ask me again. My main defense, and I remember I just said to him, I'm like, "Dude, trust me, I did not grow up rich. I know kids who grew up rich, and I know them. I went to school with some of them." Then Rob pauses and he goes, "Well, Mike, if you grew up around other rich kids and you went to school with other rich kids, then chances are Mike also grew up rich."
Boy, ain't no way, boy.
In that moment, I think I had to humble myself. Then he goes on to ask, "Well, where did you live?" And then I told him. He goes, "Did you have a maid?" And I said, "Yeah." "Did you have cars to take you around?" And I said, "Yeah." We started going through my childhood and with a different lens now. And then I realized that I did grow up with some privileges that I thought everybody else had. All this time, literally, took me 30-something years to realize oh crap, you grew up under different circumstances than somebody else. So it really beat me up in a way because all this time I always thought, well, I grew up in this dire, and the truth is I did have some crazy situations. And even after moving to New York, we grew up in what you call the ghetto in a way, low income or working class family. My dad had to work 3 jobs, minimum wage jobs. It was humbling to say the least, but I had, great parents and awesome morals that led me to where I am today. But when I thought about that conversation, as a matter of fact, it ate me up so much that I came home, talked to my wife about it, and then the next morning I called my sister. I'm like, "Hey, listen, when you think about our childhood, did we grow up like this or like this?" We had a serious conversation about it. It really made me realize again that some of the basic amenities that I had, I just thought everybody else had. They were actually privileges that I had. But 2 things happened. One, I had to humble myself, but also made me realize just how much my parents gave up to come here to give their son a better chance, or a chance at a much better future. Those things happen. And then oftentimes when I'm around friends and family, we talk about different things, even politics sometimes. Something that I've always been passionate about, and what I really want to bring out of this video, is to talk about generational wealth and this gap between the poor and the rich, because if you look at the news, you read articles, it seems like it's getting wider and wider and wider. And I'm here to tell you that unfortunately it's gonna get even wider. The truth of the matter is, there are different factors that plays into that, but just based on my own experience and being somebody that's been poor, rich, literally, I've been into that cycle. I understand more things about, one, how money works, and also how to build wealth. So how do we close the gap between the rich and the poor? Now, depending on where you're watching this video, if you're in the United States, for example, we live in a capitalist society. And again, if you look at articles, news, whatever it is that you read into, this gap seems to be getting wider, and you have either individuals or families who are just uber wealthy, and then you have people living below what you consider the poverty line. I've debated in my head why this continues to happen. And again, someone coming from a different world and being able to build here, I have a different perspective on things, right? So hear me out. When I think about the gap between the rich and poor, again, there's systematic things, there are politics that plays into it. There are professions, depending on what profession you choose to do in life. You might go this way, or you might climb the ladder, the wealth ladder, quicker or faster than somebody else, depending on your environment, relationship. So there's a lot of things that plays into it, but really, in my opinion, what really matters is this: financial knowledge. Unfortunately, I think as individuals, we've always tried to outsource our wealth building machine, or the responsibility to get from poverty to middle class or wealth, to the government. Again, this is not a political rant. I'm just trying to have a serious conversation with whoever's watching. When you think about it, you have a lot of people who are dependent on government to save them, one. And you also have situations where, well, not situations that's happening right now. You think about the government involvement in closing the wealth gap. Well, guess what? They've been doing it for decades, and the gap keeps getting bigger and bigger. That's to tell you that the government is not responsible for getting you from one economic status to another. One, that's your own responsibility. Two, the more the government gets involved in something like this, you have to understand the motive. You would want to get wealthy because you want to get wealthy, and perhaps you want to pass that wealth down to your next generation. Political leaders come into play, and they try to dip their hands into stuff, and you forget that they're only in office for a short period of time. So understanding that whatever it is that the government tries to do or does, it's only short-lived. So it's like putting a band-aid on an open wound. That's what I want to try to pull out of this video, is that, one, the first thing you have to recognize is the fact that wealth building and going from poor to rich, first of all, starts here with some financial knowledge, but also it's your own responsibility. It's not something that you outsource to another entity or to a third party. As a matter of fact, when you do that, now I'm not saying it's a bad thing to outsource. Say, for example, if you get a financial advisor or someone to help you invest your money, that's a good thing. But the idea of outsourcing your entire future, meaning the future of your kids and grandkids, to a third party, that's really shooting yourself in the foot. I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, I was hanging out with one of my business partners. His name is Max. Some of you may know Max Maxwell. You can check out his YouTube channel. Max is a guy that also comes from an immigrant family, and he's done really well for himself. And Max is building his dream house, and I got an opportunity to see his compound earlier this year. It dawned on me, first, I always love when I get opportunities like this, because one, I get to learn something new. And Max, although is a partner of mine, I also consider him as a friend and a mentor. When I saw his whole building, I said, man, this is awesome. This is inspiring. On the drive back, I started to ask him questions. The first thing I said was, this is a beautiful thing, man. Wouldn't it be awesome if more of us could do this? Because to be able to get to a place where you can afford to build your dream house, forget the American dream. That's like top high. So I started to ask Max some questions, and I said to him, how do more of us have opportunities like this. He answered my question by asking me a question. He said, okay, Mike, let's go back to the basics. He says, how does wealth work? Right? And I took a pause because I'm thinking in my head, what is it that he's asking me? Like, how does wealth work? So basically he's asking me, how does wealth work in terms of it being passed down? How does that machine work? And after a few seconds of pause, he answered the question himself, and he goes, well, the way wealth works is it trickles down. It goes from top to bottom, meaning one generation does well, and then they have a plan for the generation to come to inherit that wealth, and so on and so forth. That's how, generally speaking, that's how wealth works, and that's how it's supposed to work. If you look at a lot of wealthy families that's been wealthy for centuries, or even say the last couple of decades, that's how they pass on their wealth to the newer generation. And then I go, yeah, that's exactly how it should work. And then he says, here's the problem. In our community, meaning the Black community, he says, wealth, one, if someone gets wealthy, that's a needle, right? But when one generation does well, the wealth is not passed down. It goes up first to take care of the older generation before it's able to come down and then come down. I was like, okay, I was a little confused, but then he goes ahead to explain. He said, how do we behave culturally? We're taught that when we make it, we got to take care of our parents first. Then after taking care of parents, meaning the older generation, then you have to allow the wealth to come back down. And if you're lucky and you have enough left, then you can leave for your children. It dawned on me, and I'm like, holy crap. That's exactly how I've been taught, is that if you make it, you have to first extend that wealth up to take care of the generation ahead of you. And if you're lucky and you have some left, then you can leave some for your children and your grandchildren. That's why it's harder to build wealth, say, in the Black community. But here's the interesting fact. Poverty and being poor has no color. It doesn't discriminate. White, Black, blue, Asian, anybody can grow up in a dire and poverty circumstance. So if you're watching this video, whatever community you belong to, if you've been raised to think like this, you need to reverse that psychology. The same thing happened with me. Again, culturally, I've been taught that if I make it, then I got to take care of the generation ahead of me first before I even think about my own children. But the way it's supposed to work is I work hard and smart so that I can leave some for my children and then for their grandchildren and so on and so forth. That's how you pass the wealth down. The most important thing you can pass down is not so much material things, but rather the knowledge. And again, poverty and wealth mindset starts here. This is what's going to manifest this. Before you can manifest any type of wealth or go up the ladder, this has to change first. And that was the same thing for me. I had to change my mindset and understand that for me to pass wealth down to the next generation, I can't let that wealth go up first. And I had this conversation also with my parents. And I remember my parents telling me like, hey, we don't depend on you to take care of us. We're good. I'm grateful that my parents are smart enough to prepare for retirement, but I still feel the need to take care of them. But now I'm putting priority on the next generation after me. And that's the real message that I want to give out today, is that if you've been thinking the opposite, understand how wealth works. You build it, or the generation before you build it, and then they pass it down, and then it's your responsibility to also pass it down. So the next time you see a wealthy family, don't hate, don't get envious, learn what they're doing. And please, please do not try to outsource this responsibility to another entity. Do not outsource it to the government. The government will never, ever, ever, ever close the wealth gap. No matter how you feel about the situation, understand that it's your responsibility to gain some financial knowledge. It's your responsibility not to be short-sighted, but think about the bigger picture. Understand that you're doing something now to leave for the next generation. Now, if you don't have any kids or you don't plan to have kids, that's also okay. If your goal is to build wealth so you can enjoy it, then please, I want you to do that. But if you do have children and you want to leave something behind for the next generation, then you have to start making your psyche think that way. Wealth has to be passed down, and it will be your responsibility to gain that knowledge, because that's the most important thing that you can leave the next generation. And that's really the perspective that I'm passionate about, and I want to share this with the world, that we all have to start thinking this way. It's our responsibility. It's nobody else's. And please understand that even if you grow up rich or poor, life is never fair. If you're waiting for life to be fair, or the system to be fair, or politics to be fair, it's never going to happen. No matter what environment that you grow up in, no matter what circumstance, understand that you can make it happen. Stop waiting for things to get better before you jump in. That's my spiel for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, because it would break my heart if you watch this video and you're not thinking hard about your own situation. I want this video to inspire you to take action, and I hope you do. And if you do, please comment below. Okay, thank you so much for watching and spending time with me, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace.